Thank you for inviting me here. I've been having a really fun time. And it's given me an opportunity to talk about some new work, which, though I've pretty much always been writing about telepresence and live things in the past, that's not really what my current project is about. So it's been a nice opportunity to try to bend those things back together and find those connections and make myself into a coherent scholar of some kind, which I'm not sure is always the case. So I want to begin by acknowledging that my title is paradoxical, or maybe contradictory, and that I know it. But I'm interested today in slippery ideas, in time slips and slipstreams, and even clay slip, that material that's neither liquid nor solid, which smooths over gaps and seals separate entities together. So to address this paradox head-on, how can one have a telepresent view of the future? That's apparently impossible. We tend to use the term telepresence to indicate sensory extension into a distant location in approximately real time. Broadly, we can think of satellite transmission of live television, of the remote control of devices such as drone aircraft from thousands of miles away, or even the multiple Mars rovers that have crisscrossed the surface of our neighboring planet and acted as embodied surrogates for earthly scientists by seeing, hearing, touching, and even tasting and smelling that alien world. Telepresence is, most generally, the experience of being both here and there simultaneously, present in two places at the same moment. But admittedly, the now experience in telepresence is always a bit stretchy and capacious, as time lag is an inherent aspect of moving information, even if we perceive it as instantaneous. The further information must travel across cable or bouncing off satellites, the greater delay and the more it disturbs the perceptual and functional possibilities of real time. A lagging phone call or satellite video connection might cause one to suddenly realize just how fast and how far our information travels. Controlling a rover on Mars, however, involves a 10-minute or so delay between sending and the return of a signal, making live control of a device impossible, even if it is still profoundly moving and awe-inspiring to have an embodied presence on another world, viewing images of a just out-of-sync past. Sorry, I moved my cursor. So telepresence could also be an experience of being simultaneously now and then, not just here and there. This might be imperceptible fractions of a second long or disorienting delays that make us experience the quantum truth that there is no now. I want to lean into this strange misalignment of time and allow myself to get a bit speculative and a bit weird. Sorry, that went for it. Adding the not yet to the now and then. The first part of my title, Martian Time Slip, pulls on a thread running through science fiction literatures about Mars. The phrase originates with Philip K. Dick in his 1964 book of that title. Martian Time Slip is set on a colonized Mars. An indigenous and recognizably human population has been dispossessed and indentured, so it's a true colony and not just a space settlement. The main drama focuses on earthly homesteaders trying unsuccessfully to make the desert world as much like mid-century America as possible. It's not merely the habitat that makes life so different, but also the prevalence of neurodivergence among the children born on Mars. It emerges over the course of the novel that the children are experiencing a kind of sped-up time and are living, as it were, in the future. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, land speculators and real estate developers become interested in these abilities and how the children might aid in securing a profitable future and maintaining the status quo by meddling in distinctions between the then, the now, and the not yet. Kim Stanley Robinson borrows Dick's phrase in his Mars trilogy from the mid-1990s, an epic story of the first scientific settlements on Mars and the revolutions that come with international colonization and resource extraction. The Martian time slip in Robinson's novels names not a psychological condition, but an anomaly of clock and calendar time, produced by the attempt to stay in sync with Earth and the cadence of its day. The Martian day, or sol, is almost 40 minutes longer than an Earth day. So in the novels, the clocks stop at midnight each night for that duration, opening up a gap of unaccounted time. The time slip becomes a sort of witching hour where illicit and normally unthinkable things occur. So while attempting to enforce earthly logics and structures on a new place, the time slip produces a prolonged moment of total freedom and indeterminacy. Time is slippery. What happens in these gaps and lags? Using the idea of the Martian time slip as a wedge, I want to open up a space to think about weird time, about loops and bends, repeating pasts and spiraling speculative futures. I want to think about what and when we see when we look at and from Mars. On February 18, 2021, NASA's Perseverance rover touched down on the dusty surface of Mars. It landed in an ancient lakebed now known as Jezero Crater, with a great fanning river delta cut into iron red rock. Long ago, about 3.6 billion years in the past, water rushed across a warm and wet planet, roughly contemporaneous with the Earth's own Archean era, when life first began to emerge. Now in this cold and dim desert, Perseverance performs its astrobiological mission guided by earthly scientists searching for the fossilized evidence of microbial life on the once blue red planet. Implied in NASA's stated goals for the research to pave the way for human exploration are implied the next steps, presumably settling the land, extracting valuable metals and minerals, and terraforming this world into green Earth's image. No human has yet set foot on Mars, but Perseverance and the other Mars rovers allow one to imagine what it might be like. Their cameras trace circular panoramas in the barren landscape, picturing scattered fields of meteorites, broken volcanic debris strewn before steep craggy cliffs and rising rusty escarpments. The pale peachy sky hugs a horizon that appears alarmingly close on this significantly smaller world. The rovers deliver first-person views of a wilderness that is empty, disorderly, and dead. The sounds that it beams back to Earth are overwhelming recordings of that screaming we call silence. The scenes would be desolate and alienating if they were not also so familiar. These otherworldly landscapes look like uncanny glimpses of the spectacular canyons of the American Southwest or the rocky red deserts of Central Australia. NASA scientists actually named the area surrounding the landing site after the Canyon de Chelly, or Tasehi, in the center of Navajo Nation in Arizona, one of the longest continually inhabited places in North America. For more than 5,000 years, various peoples and cultures, alongside even more ancient plant and animal residents, have shaped, groomed, farmed, and altered the landscape. It is the utter random disorder of Mars, not a rock seemingly overturned for purpose or shoved aside, that signals humanity's radical distance from these images of this place, despite the rover's embodied vantage points. Videos and photographs of Mars force one to conceptualize a nature that is insulated from associations with anything living, wet, or moving with the agency and selfish desire to survive. This, however, is changing. These telepresent views of another world provided by the rovers already bear human traces and index the desire to survive, to persevere against all odds and obstacles. Often the distance in this image, obscured by rocky ejecta, is Perseverance's discarded parachute and 15-foot diameter back shell. The rover's images often narcissistically capture its own crisscrossing tire tracks and document an increasingly marked and disturbed, even littered environment. Everywhere it ventures, Perseverance leaves neatly cut, perfectly cylindrical boreholes as it collects samples for a future return to Earth. These curious holes will remain long after the wind erases the tire tracks and even the landing gear is pulverized to rust and dust. Perseverance is the first rover with the explicit task to search for life. It's already found undeniable evidence, but it is not the hypothesized fossilized microbes or primordial algae mats, or at least not yet. Rather, it's the traces of human presence, even at a distance, already scattered about the globe in advance of our bodily arrival. The age of the Anthropocene has already dawned on Mars. When probing the ancient rocks, areologists are not only decoding a story of the past, but they are beginning to write a future. Mars's present gives us insight about Earth's deep past, perhaps frozen at the moment just when or just before life could emerge. But it also gives us a glimpse of Earth's possible future, a watery planet turned to desert, evidence of incomprehensible shifts in climate and atmospheric deterioration, but also of a place we could perhaps inhabit, We can already imagine ourselves in these first-person perspectives, and the world-making and world-breaking skills we've honed at home, thickening the atmosphere and raising global temperatures, might be turned upon this planet, this unsuspecting world, to make it over in our own image. But there are weirder times at work, I think, in these images than those of geological deep time and entrepreneurial forecasting. Our telepresent endeavors on Mars suggest other strange but not impossible temporalities. Over the last 2 centuries, theoretical physics has revealed that time is not as simple as it seems. It only appears to move in a straight line from a fixed past through a shared present now to a yet-to-be-determined not yet. This distortion is produced by our particular situated perspective in the grand cosmic quantum universe. An event, in quantum physicist Carlo Rovelli writes, may occur both before and after another one. And I'll take this provocation, which, to be honest, I really barely understand, and it's like sand moving through my fingers, to the provocation that time might be otherwise than we usually experience it, to blur either in great simultaneous blocks or in less linearly ordered ways jumping from here and there, to blur the apparently stable pasts and speculate upon seemingly impossible futures. To do so opens the possibility of re-envisioning, reinventing, or reclaiming our apparent now and its political vectors. At the center of this swirl, I would like to place the artwork of Sarah Rosalina, whose beautiful and perplexing objects use digital fabrication technologies, machine learning, NASA-generated research, and indigenous craft practices to upend our stable apprehensions of past, presents, and futures. And I should say, like, part of the reason why this talk is on her is because I just opened a very large museum exhibition that I curated of her work. And so she's been the only thing on my mind for quite a while, and the catalog that came with it. So while potentially outlandish and self-consciously science-fictional, as I've already indicated, the temporalities I want to suggest in relationship to Rosalina's work are not novel and have authoritative precedent. Anishinaabe scholar, literary scholar Grace Dillon has theorized a related concept of spiraling time that she calls native slipstream, which uncovers quantum logics in traditional thought and storytelling practices. Drawing upon a broad range of indigenous science fiction literatures and cosmological beliefs, Dillon suggests nonlinear, non-Western conceptualizations of time that infuse stories of time travel, alternate realities, multiverses, and alternative histories. As its name implies, she writes, native slipstreams view times as past, present, and futures that flow together like currents in a navigable stream. It thus replicates nonlinear thinking about space-time. This is an ancient way of thinking that now appears suddenly futuristic, Dillon explains, as it seems to anticipate cutting-edge physics such as multiverses and of quantum mechanics, ironically suggesting that natives have had it right all along. It's experimental and avant-garde, she argues, but nevertheless it models a cultural experience of reality while also recovering native space of the past to build better futures. The native slipstream evokes ancient and traditional, yet simultaneously futuristic and radical concepts of temporality. Time, Dillon writes, may be shaped more like a spiral, a shape which has the potential to rupture colonial frameworks and expectations, thereby producing glimpses of a world outside of settler time. Even without veering into science fiction, Catherine Yusuf's work, A Billion Black Anthropocenes or None, suggests how the sedimented geological record evidences a looping time in which an anticipated event has already occurred. While the Anthropocene fuels fears of impending ecological disaster and civilizational collapse, the perception of the apocalypse being in the future, she explains, is a matter of perspective and racialized privilege. The geological record, quite literally, provides proof of numerous prior apocalypses experienced by Black, brown, and indigenous peoples in which civilizations have been eradicated and ecosystems destroyed by the acts and effects of settler colonialism. Written in rock and ice, one can see evidence of the slave trade and intercontinental colonialism and racial capitalism, not just the nuclear age and birth of plastics. Dillon echoes these statements, arguing that indigenous peoples are already living in the post-apocalypse, the future that white liberal communities actively fear, and that it may be ancestral technologies and knowledges that help shape a different future. Rosalina is a Wiarika indigenous artist working at the intersections of computation and craft, drawing upon NASA's astronomical, geological, and remote sensing research to create objects that unsettle the boundaries that apparently exist between the past and present and futures, as well as simultaneously complicating other false binaries, such as between the handmade and the autonomous, art and craft, the human and the more than human, and the earthly and the otherworldly. Take her 2020 series, Transposing a Form, for example, which troubles these comfortable categorizations. Oh, sorry, that's here, in the foreground, the sculptures. Coil on top of coil, these sculptures appear to have grown into their spiraling forms like corals or sponges, those strange animals that often seem more like motionless plants or sedentary stones. They take spiral forms, familiar from ancient enduring techniques of transforming clay, the humblest of materials, into useful tools that support and sustain civilizations. The precision of their layers cite the automated path of a 3D printer, as well as the mathematical forms found in nature, such as in the tight phyllotaxis of leaves on a succulent and the scales of a pine cone, or the logarithmic expansion of a nautilus shell. The coiling technique simultaneously signals the traditional and the high-tech, the handmade and the mechanically produced. And lastly, among these opposites, is perhaps the most startling of all. These are not terracotta or baked earth. Rather, they claim to be baked Mars. NASA's rovers have allowed us, Earthlings, to view, observe, poke and probe, burn with lasers so as to sniff and taste the mineral and chemical compositions of Mars, resulting in Martian regolith simulant, the material from which Rosalina makes these structures. She uses a 3D printer filled with a Martian clay slip developed in collaboration, working alongside scientists at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory to grow these forms, which are shapes based on the mathematical structures of time-bending black holes. There is something time-bending about them too, indeed. While the tight coils and materials are reminiscent of Puebloan pots made in the American Southwest for millennia, and the simulant from which they are produced, MMS2, Mojave Mars simulant, makes these two environments geological and chemical analogs. It is likely that any future construction on Mars will be 3D printed, perhaps remotely from local Adobe, making further strange connections between traditional indigenous technologies and speculative human futures. The long success of populations in desert climates, farming and thriving, again are held up now as models of sustainable lifeways in future off-world settlements. There's a deep and unpleasant irony in these loops, as knowledge is once dismissed as primitive and populations faced with unrelenting dispossession and genocide are reclaimed by high technology and advanced research as visions of a future. Rosalina's objects are unsteady in the now. Instead, they seem to oscillate between the past and the future in ways that I hope cause us to see the analogies between colonial era atrocities and futuristic entrepreneurial dreams of new frontiers, resource sites, and markets. They remind us that science fiction is a body of literature about manifest destiny, colonial expansion, and alien encounters, and that science fiction's visions of the future are most often repeating, looping versions of our past. The manifestation in our present of an artifact that appears to be from a possible future that looks like the past destabilizes our hold on the now and introduces a wobble into the progression of linear space-time. And that curve enables us to reimagine an approach and take a turn. We can enter the loop of a spiral rather than the vectors toward manifest destiny and extractive futures. Rosalina's companion body of work of jacquard woven textiles, which you saw, in the background here, below, uses a neural network to process the epic amounts of visual satellite data collected from Mars, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, to predict environmental and climate shifts over millions of years, but they're trained on historical data about Earth. She processes Martian data based on what we know about Earth, its deep past and its projected future, based on human effects and interventions. These double-sided tapestries enable the viewer to toggle between pasts and futures. The recto shows a red planet turning blue, the verso shows just the opposite, a blue planet turning red. They allow us to imagine the terraforming of Mars and at the same time the desertification of Earth through climate change. In a strange twisting flip, one could also see a blue Mars as both a deep past and a projected future. It's unclear where we stand in relationship to these images, in the deep past or in the not yet, or in a strange speculative slippery now from which we might choose an alternate direction. Rosalina's tapestries, though written line by line on her loom, can tell multiple stories with different beginnings and alternate trajectories toward the future by manifesting an unstable object materially in our present. To do so requires imagining ourselves in those remote yet embodied views of and from Mars that Perseverance, Curiosity, Ingenuity, and the other Mars rovers have delivered, and also in the time slip from where or for when we can potentially imagine something new, splintered off the apparently inevitable trajectory toward a particular future. We might see in the slip a time in which a planet or an ecosystem might have some rights or claims to sovereignty outside or even against human need and desire, where ancestral knowledges might rehabilitate current conditions here by recognizing and respecting the destiny of both planets. From this time slip, we might picture that these are our last glimpses of Mars, of a future that never happened. Thanks.